get this ball rolling, if someone can find a solution to New Zealand's horrific suicide and mental health statistics, I would support them 100%, irrespective. This, however, isn't it, not by a long shot. The research on this video started innocently enough when I caught a snippet on the radio about a supposed pre-European health practice of Maramatka, how it was going to go mainstream to a town and city near you and me, and then I lost the scribbled note, found it again, and at the same time I saw a promotion at the Christchurch Library. My look into the historic basis of Maramatka began with an element of fascination. 20 books later, however, I'd come to the conclusion it was never a thing, at least in the sense it is promoted today. The inquisitive person, being myself, had now become the inquisitor. Kindly note, the sources of all my research are at the very end of this video and in the description. The upshot of my research was lunar cycles were used by Maori for fishing and planting crops only, never for health and well-being. To cap it off, then an article you're about to see has sprung up in the news. Exactly how much has been thrown at this hocus pocus? I went from being interested to incensed when I discovered tens of millions are currently going to this treatment that A, firstly never existed, B, has zero efficacy, C, involves the bizarre belief Maori are unable to fully function in modern day life using the Gregorian calendar, thus joining illustrious company like the mad dictator from Turkmenistan and Pol Pot. Valuable staff resources at hospitals are being given over to this flim-flam at the very time we need staff at the front line more than ever. One of the downsides of modern life is spending time online. The World Wide Web has quenched our thirst for an instant fix, occupies our time in the same way books did only 20 years ago, only way more pervasively. With this, we have largely become dependent on the internet for information. By information, I'm not just talking about news in this context, I'm also referring to history. From the mid-90s, history was now up on the internet for all to see. This has proved to be a double-sided sword. Inherently lazy humans no longer needed to leave the comfort of their home to find out X or Y and go to the bookshop or library. The internet now made it possible to say 2 plus 2 equals 5 and even have a global audience. Put up enough guff and something was bound to stick. You can state, for example, Polynesians travelled from Rarotonga to the South Pole in return. The traditional Maori word for North Island meant the whole of New Zealand. Matariki was celebrated with remembrances of the dead and get-togethers, and Maramatka was a widespread holistic pre-European medical practice. Even get it published on the front of a newspaper, emblazoned on state-run websites, when none of that is true, at least according to what is in writing, what we used to call history. The trouble has become little to no one will worry about or question what the media have to say now. Truth, half-truths, or outright BS. The lines are blurred. And the ones that do say that's utter bullshit are either deliberately ignored or become the ones that are dubbed ignorant for telling the truth. Expect ad hominems and questions as to their motives and not their evidence. One, of course, could be dismissive, suggest that revisionist history doesn't hurt anyone, calling the whole country Aotearoa after all, when the word refers just to the North Island, doesn't result in anyone suffering harm. What happens, though, when untruths and superstition are promoted unquestionably in the mainstream media, unscrutinised, lest they upset the ones paying some of their wages, published as is whereas, believed, becomes fact with the public, and then pervasively even enters our health system. Then this unfounded paradigm ultimately goes on to start harming people. Well, we've reached that point in New Zealand. Ignorance is now strength. It wasn't that long ago that mankind wasn't really up with the play as to his or her place in the cosmos. No one knew stars were suns, only further away. The Earth travelled around the Sun and not the other way round. Mass primary school education only became compulsory in England in 1860. The average person wandering the streets today could tell you the origins of mankind, when that fact would be a mystery even to the most learned person on Earth in 1750. Back then, superstition filled the gaps in knowledge and information. Long before we have what we now consider to be medical doctors, if you got crook, you look for guidance and a cure via one of the 3,000 mainstream gods worshipped by humanity. Believed the earth was created in, say, 6 days and New Zealand was fished out of the ocean. Another belief putting up the holes was that the moon and stars influenced our lives. 300 BC, one of the greatest philosophers of all time, Aristotle, was one of those believers. The light and position of the moon affected mental health. The word lunatic comes from the Latin word for the moon, luna. The term for the supposed correlation of the moon's movements and human behaviour is called the Lunar Effect. Here's the wiki page on the thoroughly debunked theory. There's not a lot to it, frankly. Correlation is not causation. 40 published studies say it's utter bumpkin. Humans don't operate like eels. We don't need the moon to guide us today or any day. It's like ACC are surveying accident claimants, asking them if they had Weet-Bix or cornflakes for breakfast that morning. Along the same lines are the widespread ancient beliefs that astronomical bodies like stars and planets have a bearing on human activity, more than just the weather, seasons and tides. Your love life, when to go to war, why crops failed, were all once believed to be influenced by the stars and the planets. The very word influence comes from astrology. The first civilizations were largely followers of the astral religions, China to Mesopotamia. The Egyptians constructed the Great Pyramid of Giza to align to the Northern Star. The Mayans sacrificed citizens to keep the sun burning. It was actually a New Zealander, Ernest Rutherford, who figured out our sun was emitting radioactive energy, a giant nuclear fusion reactor. I wonder how our greatest scientist would feel if he knew that in 2022 the New Zealand health system would be embracing little more than superstition to treat mental health patients, taking vital resources away from other areas in need. This mass credulity has a name, one not published, by the way, in any New Zealand newspaper in the same context between 1900 and 1970. Maramatka. In short, millions are being spent to treat Maori mental health patients to follow the phases of the moon. 100 million to be precise. Encompassed with all of this comes living your life without the boundaries that constrain other citizens, say working at 9 to 5 and going to school Monday to Friday. To use their description, reading the cosmos can prepare us for what is coming. Shame it couldn't predict the earthquake that took out my garage roof and damaged my house. Follow the moon and you can get the jump on depression, paranoia, behavioural disorders, psychosis, schizophrenia, anxiety, bipolar affective disorder, dissociation, post-traumatic stress. But only if you're Maori. As far as I can figure it, the moon is powerless when faced with Europeans, Chinese and other New Zealanders. Therefore, one can only presume it's less effective to someone who is 30% Maori versus one that's 60%. You don't have to have gone to Otago Medical School to know it's dangerous to treat all patients with the same cure, but here we are, embracing complementary medical treatments without the slightest efficacy, no studies, no evidence. Meanwhile, at the same time, pharmaceutical companies are required to spend millions testing their products, and we have MedSafe to police them. The very same MedSafe that rations taxpayers' dollars for the drugs tells desperate Kiwis every week we can't afford that drug, which is sadly all but a death sentence for many. Now and again, you and me are exposed to their plight, and this is Missy, mother of 4 with an aggressive form of lymphoma. Owen Franks is auctioning his All Blacks jersey to fund the drugs the government agency says we all can't afford, when others can. Total respect to you, Mr. Franks, for For anyone who thinks there's no harm reintroducing 300-year-old remedies, reading the cosmos, wasting $100 million in the process, tell that to the missies in our midst. Perhaps if we had nurses manning the emergency departments, not away learning how some of their patients aren't keen to live their lives based on the Gregorian calendar, taught to operate a cardboard lunar cycle wheel that resembles an old-fashioned time zone wheel, patients wouldn't be dying waiting in A&E. Next up, we will be addressing truancy rates by running school terms based on the moon cycles. It doesn't seem out of the realms to me. Personally, I don't want to even dabble in decade-old treatments. I want the latest. Let's now go back to 1750, when we are all told Maramatka was a widespread health practice. That's not true, by the way. You'll only find written records of the term being employed in the context of fishing and planting, if at all. Most older dictionaries don't even include the word or list it simply as a single word, either calendar or lunar. Anyway, say you're in Scotland and not a village in New Zealand all the way back then in 1750. Regardless of the affliction, a Glaswegian doctor had bugger all in his armoury. His general prescriptions consisted of two, dare I say, remedies. Those two are alcohol or opium. The stethoscope wasn't invented till 1816, anaesthesia 1846. Epileptics were thrown into New Zealand lunatic asylums in the 1880s. A video about that I've done previously follows this one. Despite still living in the shadow of the Great Pyramid, modern-day Egyptians aren't having their brains removed through their nostrils with a wire hook to assist their journey in the afterlife. In Guatemala and Belize, the descendants of the Mayans aren't looking down the list in the paper for those in the town about to get bloodletted on the next eclipse. When it comes to medicine, old isn't better. Bag's going to get your knee done by a surgeon who employs traditional pre-1970s procedures, not arthroscopic keyhole methods. Not all medical systems are created equal. No one wants to come a cropper on a holiday in Ethiopia and end up in a hospital there, and no one goes to Tonga to get their tits done. No sensible person insists they get operated on like their ancestors did in 1500. Here we are today, throwing millions at a discredited belief. The very week, 93% of medical professionals say the health system is in crisis, and some are even predicting a catastrophic collapse is on the cards. Makes one wonder if the lunatics are now running the asylum. Better go outside, look up into the sky, make it the night, probably help. See what day it is, if it's safe to go to the shops. Bye for now.